we don't have to become experts in sales necessarily, but we do have to become experts in selling what it is that we do.
But it's around that imposter syndrome impact, especially in a sales role.
I think that absence of knowledge in the sales environment is what's causing a lot of the imposter syndrome.
But I don't know what advice you give to people, but that coping with rejection is a big thing to have to go through when you're not used to it, right?
We've all had that experience, and I think that's what feeds into a lot of the fear around sales, is you just don't want to become that.
So I went to the dentist this morning.
Oh yeah.
And you come out and you're feeling all fresh and think this is great. But I had a moment while I was at the dentist. Now, I've been seeing Bruce, my dentist, for the best part of the 20 years that I've lived in Shrewsbury. And he's always been bothered that I've got a gap in my smile. Those people on YouTube will have seen this before. And it sort of bothered me, but not enough to do anything about it. And it's always bothered him a lot more than me. Anyway, he was doing his usual prodding everything with the prodder thing this morning. And he saw the tooth that should be there poking through for the first time. And I've always known it's been up there because it shows up on the x-rays. It just never came down when I was a kid. And apparently that happens to 1% of people. There you go. But it just poked through. So he was the first person ever in the world to see that tooth.
That should have been there.
Yeah.
That's quite a cool moment.
It's cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then we started talking about, well, what other things do you ever get the chance to see for the first time before anybody else has ever seen them? Like the inside of an egg or something, a newborn puppy or something. And there aren't that many things, are there?
There aren't that many things. But just on the tooth thing,
yeah.
I have the gaps both sides in exactly the same place. Yeah. And it's when I actually kept my baby teeth until I was in my early 40s.
Yeah, me too.
Because there was no tooth
I lost one
come out.
in my 20s on a pickled onion.
On a pickled onion?
and that was this one. And then that one did grow through.
Right.
But in my late 20s. But the other one, I had till I was about 40.
Yeah.
And then the milk tooth falls out. You had the same?
Yeah.
Bizarre. Yeah. 1% of people.
Right. And they're in this room.
Mine. What's the chance of that? Well, 1% squared. Probably.
Yeah, 1%.
Yeah. Well, there you go. We don't talk about some complete nonsense at the beginning of these podcasts. Something slightly different. Should we do a podcast then?
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. This is episode 114 and unusually, it's not me and Richard waffling on like usual. We have a guest in the studio and we're very pleased to welcome Tracy Miller. Thank you very much for coming in.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Very exciting. Not only that, but you've driven all the way from Newbury to be here, involved an overnight stay in one of our lovely hotels locally in Shrewsbury. We got to go out for a nice meal last night as well.
It was a huge hardship. I got upgraded to a suite. I got taken out for dinner.
Was it good?
It was very challenging.
Right. Yeah. So we should give a shout out for the Darwin's Townhouse then.
Definitely.
So if anybody's visiting
Fabulous.
Shrewsbury, go and check them out. Nice place. And the line of pheasant was great for a meal as well.
I would absolutely recommend that as well. The whole thing's been an absolute joy so far.
So just in case anybody gets ideas, not all guests get put up and taken out for meals as well. But Tracy was very keen to come all the way up here and see what we were doing, interested in the podcast and our business as well.
Yeah.
And we had a great chat about that. But also to come and share us some of your expertise. So today's subject, it's a bit of a theme actually, following on from last week's, which we'll go through because traditionally we talk about the last three episodes at the beginning. So this, as I said, is episode 114. 113 last week, we had a guest in again, Steve Arnold. Now, that's unusual. 2 weeks in a row with guests. Normally we go months without them. You're like London buses. So we had Steve Arnold come in, and he is a retired sales pro. And he gave great perspectives of what sales has changed like over the length of his career and some tips that stand the test of time and all that sort of thing. So that was really good. And we'll be carrying on in a kind of a sales advice-y sort of theme today as well. So that was 113. 112 happened to go out on around about almost exactly the 5th anniversary of lockdown when Boris Johnson came on the telly and told us all to stay indoors. So we did one on a retrospective of what have we learnt because of COVID-19 and how many of those lessons have now been forgotten and we're just all back to normal anyway. And the one before that, 111, was around the customer experience and how we should be personalising the customer experience more. The customers expect their experiences now to be more personalised, but they are generally disappointed because they're not. So they were the last 3 episodes. But anyway, back to today, 114. And what we wanted to get your expertise on, I think will really strike a chord with lots of listeners, but not in a way that they're perhaps prepared to admit to the outside world. And it applies a lot to salespeople, but not exclusively. It applies a lot to business owners. Sure. But it's around that imposter syndrome impact, especially in a sales role.
Yeah.
So how did that become a thing for you to be so involved in?
So my own personal story is what led me into the kind of imposter syndrome and / sales space. So before I set up my business 16 years ago now, I spent 15 years in IT sales. And the entire time living with imposter syndrome. So I didn't really know what I was doing. I was really good at kind of blagging my way through it. I had that sense that I felt I should know things, but wasn't prepared to admit that I didn't know them, which is where imposter syndrome comes from. And yeah, 15 years of honestly hell. I had some highs and some very deep lows. But that's my personal journey, the lack of confidence, the imposter syndrome in the sales environment.
But if you kept that going for 15 years, clearly you were successful in that role. You must have developed some quite strong coping strategies.
That's exactly it. You nailed it. So I absolutely had coping strategies. So one of them was this persona that I created with this kind of, kick-ass bitch that, nobody could hurt and, and... Yeah, but I was super chatty as well. So I was good at building relationships. I was good at, forging like trust. And so I leveraged the skills that I had with this persona that I created and just covered the whole thing up.
Was that persona very different from your natural persona?
Well, that's an interesting question. So I did initially. So I was a very shy kid, and then I kind of developed this persona and lived into it. And then what's happened now, so as I've become more confident, which I have done over the years now, there's elements of that have just become part of me because I've been that for such a long time. So there are absolutely people out there today that would consider that that's still who I am. But a lot of it's softened now, and it's steeped much more in authenticity, which it definitely wasn't back then.
Do you feel more rooted and grounded and
very much so
comfortable in your own skin?
Very much more comfortable in my own skin.
So did you come out of that role then with some sort of fervour to say, right, that's it, that's my gift to the world, I'm going to help everybody else who's been in the same position? Or did it just sort of come about by accident?
I would love to say that it was this elegant exit where I had this big plan and it was all amazing and life just got better from that moment. It was a shit show. So I just got to the point in that role where I just couldn't continue anymore, and I knew that. So I took some time off just to kind of get my head clear, and then I resigned like 2 weeks, and then I was gone. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do. I'd been trying to learn coaching kind of on and off. So I thought, right, I'm going to do that. I don't know what guise it's going to be in, but I want to learn to coach. Then I learned a little bit about niching, which is a very good way to get known. And I niched on something which was authentic for me, which was around confidence because of my background. So I started out as a confidence coach working with, by accident, small businesses, because I went out and got my business from networking. So yeah, it was really accidental and very inelegant.
But you ended up where you are now, which is a good space. Now, you meet a lot of business owners who are probably still in the phase that you were in your 15 years, the kick-ass version of Tracy. Right? Yeah. So how do they come to terms with the fact that they need to have a different type of conversation with you? Is it a bit like that Alcoholics Anonymous moment where they have to stand up and admit to something? Or is it, I don't know, how does it happen?
So what, from a confidence perspective, you mean?
Someone comes to you and they appear to be kick-ass versions as well and, on the face of it, confident. Yeah. But then they somehow get to accept or confess to you that they've got imposter syndrome.
So I don't deal solely with imposter syndrome now. That's where I started. Yep. What I tend to... So people don't look for change when everything's going fine. They'll keep things ticking over. When people are looking for something different, it's because there's a problem. The shit has hit the fan somewhere. And confidence is one of those problems, but there's other problems for small businesses, like, not enough money coming in or, various other issues. So typically the people that come to me now are coming to me already admitting that they have some kind of issue somewhere. My job is to get to the bottom of what that really is so we can see whether there's a way forward.
And that's often what comes up then to this.
It comes up a lot. So, and probably about 90% of the people that I see, somewhere in there, there's fear, doubt, or imposter syndrome somewhere because of, the way we're conditioned in the UK.
And do you think that's more prevalent in sales roles?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think it's very prevalent in both sales roles and small business owners. And I think it's because there is, in both of those places, there's very few places to hide. So what I generally find is whatever you've got going on from a childhood trauma or imposter syndrome or fear or doubt perspective gets magnified. So you suddenly see all your shit looking back at you. And I think that's the same in sales and the sales element of running a small business. Yeah.
Right, so I've been on your website and I've seen that you've got quite a lot of material on there, free material for people to help through that. So tell me, what is it that what do you say first when you're trying to help people through that? What are the best bits of advice you can give them when they've just realised that that's the help they're going to accept
specifically
from you?
Around imposter syndrome or
for salespeople
sales?
In particular? I'm quite interested in how that affects salespeople and really holds them back in being able to do their job, even though they've somehow ended up in the role.
Okay, so it's quite broad advice, but the first thing is to, in order to get past imposter syndrome, we have to accept that there is a problem, there's a gap. And for most small business owners, the gaps are kind of in multiple places. So there's obviously the fear and doubt that they're bringing to the table and any stuff that they've got that, like childhood stuff, fears, doubts. But there's also what I find with most business owners or most salespeople is there's gaps in their knowledge and their skills and their resources, and they can all be resolved. So it's things like looking at, do we really understand who our customer is? Do we really understand our service inside out? Do we understand our pricing strategy and our proposition and how we're going to take that to market? Do we have a process, like a really nice sales process to take our customers through that we understand? Do we know how to close? And all of these things can be taught. We don't have to become experts in sales necessarily, but we do have to become experts in selling what it is that we do. And if we can learn those components, it's like a feedback loop with imposter syndrome. If we keep going out with gaps in our game, we keep getting bad feedback, which feeds into this imposter syndrome. If we can get some of these like foundational things in place, we can start having better experiences, which builds our confidence, and it starts creating a very different feedback loop. So
that's quite interesting then. There's a bit in there that sort of took me a bit by surprise.
Okay.
And I think I've been imagining the main cause as maybe the wrong one, or perhaps there's two.
Interesting. Okay.
But I'm wondering, what is it that people feel they are an imposter of or for, whatever you're supposed to say? Is it of being a salesperson, and they think, why am I in a sales role? Yep. I've never been trained in sales, I don't know how to sell anything, I couldn't sell, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
Or is it that they don't know the product or service that they're selling? And your experience, the 15 years, sounded like you were selling a highly complicated product, Correct. IT software.
Yep.
You couldn't possibly know all about it.
Correct.
And I'd imagined, this is the danger of jumping to assumptions and all that your issues there around imposter syndrome were because you couldn't possibly get your head around everything that you're trying to sell. Was it that so much, and is that what you see, or is it more about just that I'm not supposed to be a salesman, I'm not cut out for it?
That's a really interesting question. So if I think about my own imposter syndrome, it was because I didn't truly understand the components that I've just been through. So what it is that I'm selling, how to sell it, how to position it, and how to take them through a really clear process. I just
so having
didn't
a robust
have that.
process, having confidence in it, knowing the steps.
Exactly. And so if I'd had that, I would have had a better feedback loop. Because I didn't have that, what you'd end up having is those awkward, icky kind of conversations, because it's just not flowing, and you're tripping over yourself, and you're trying to think about what you're saying next.
Complicated? Does it have to be very detailed? If you're going to have an agreed sales process that you can be confident with, does that take a lot of designing? Is that sort of a big company thing?
No.
Or can even small companies come up with
100% small companies can come up with that. There's something that we call the consultative sales process, which is a really simple step-by-step process that you take a customer through. And it doesn't need to be onerous. In fact, the more complex it is, the harder it is for you to remember what the process is when you're in the process. So the simpler it is, the better. But what we do need to practice is working through that process and really being able to articulate what it is that we do. And most imposter syndrome for me that I see in this space comes from not really understanding or having the skills and resources that you need to be good at sales.
And does it really matter whether the process is A, B, C or ACB or whatever? or just that you have one? Is it almost a crutch to think, I've got a process to follow, which may not be perfect, but it's at least something to follow? Is it more important that you have one? Or actually, I don't know if you can just Google it or ChatGPT it, is there a process that you tend to offer people as a startup?
It's a little bit of both. So it is important, I think, to have a process because it gives you that peace of mind and that alleviates the fear and the doubt, and you've got something to fall back on when you kind of lose your way. So I think that is important. But equally, there are steps to go through in a sales process. So trying to close a deal when you've barely understood what the requirements are is crazy. So there are certain steps that you need to go through, and that's a process that you can follow. So yeah, a little bit of both.
And do you tend to fall, is it sort of just simple blocks of discovering qualification, solution design, proposal, negotiation, close?
A little bit.
Or is it a little bit more nuanced than that?
It's a little bit like that. So it's really about seeing where you can offer value first. So I'm talking about the small business arena. So seeing where you can offer value first and establish credibility and rapport. Then it's about really understanding requirements. And one of the biggest mistakes small businesses do is they go into trying to sell before there's something to hook your sale on. So it's about really understanding the requirements, what is going on, not just at a surface level, but on a much deeper level with your potential client. And it's about finding an authentic, and this is key, authentic sales is about finding an authentic hook, like something that the customer is saying where you think, I can genuinely help them with that. And then finding the right time to get permission to say, can I tell you a little bit about how I can help you with that particular problem? There's a point here, though, and this authentic bit is absolutely key, because you have to be willing to walk away. So if you cannot legitimately find that hook, you have to be willing to say, I don't think I can help you with this, and walk away. And that integrity then is another feedback loop that feeds into the positive feelings, the confidence.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we all get cold calls all the time where this is absolutely done very, very badly. And you can tell that someone's up against the target. Maybe they've had a really bad day or week, and they're just so desperate to try and find an angle. And you're really feeling for them because you know they're wasting their time. They should be speaking to someone else who might actually buy from them. But they can't bring themselves to realize it. They're plugging away at this, flogging the dead horse. How do you help people with that?
So that's a tricky one for me, because I think that we've all had that experience, and I think that's what feeds into a lot of the fear around sales, is you just don't want to become that. And it is a little bit heartbreaking when you see someone like that, or people just get annoyed. Like, it's just so confronting. They just don't want to be part of it. So again, it's about the process. So that is the classic, first of all, desperation. So we have not got our mindset in the right place. That's absolutely critical. But it's also, we've missed these fundamental components of what is your problem, Mr. Potential Customer, and do I have something that authentically fits? And when we miss that, it's just uncomfortable. It's that car salesman that's trying to ram that car down your throat. You don't want it. You don't need it. It's just so uncomfortable. Yeah. So
is it different on the phone as opposed to in person?
No, I think it's exactly the same. I think it's exactly the same process. I think it's slightly easier, although we've all got used to things like Zoom and that now. But I think it's slightly easier when you're physically with somebody, because there's an energy exchange, so you can feel energy. I think it's easier to build rapport and trust when you're in a room with somebody. But no, I think the process is exactly the same regardless. So
when you get these cold calls, you must get them all the time as well. Someone comes on doing this really bad version. Can you resist going into coaching mode and saying, look, can I stop you right there? Let me give you a few tips.
I had an experience actually with a lady that I did end up working with, and she was absolutely brilliant. She'd listened to what I wanted. She'd hooked her services on. It was just superb, until she got to the sales pitch, and it just died. Like, the whole thing, I was so disappointed and so heartbroken for her, because it just died. When you want to buy something, there's nothing worse than a bad sales process, because you want it to be good. But yeah, I did in that instance. I did say, look, can I offer you a little bit of advice and try and coach her on the sales bit? So it depends on the person. If I think they're open. Pardon?
How did she take it?
She took it really well, actually. She did take it really well. But you have to be very careful because not everyone likes unsolicited advice.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's hard to hold back if that's your profession.
Yeah.
And I must admit, I have congratulated people in the past when I've had an absolutely amazing opening pitch that's got me. I thought, that is good. Well done. You've done a great job there, and I'll tell them. But I had one the other day where somebody rang up and effectively read me the brochure for their company. I thought, what a shame. And they may be listening to this local company. If they are, then I apologise for outing you. I won't name you on air, but it was so painful. And they didn't stop for breath. If I wanted to just say, can I just ask a few questions, or just even a non-verbal utterance to acknowledge the fact that I was actively listening, couldn't even get a word in edgeways. And I had to sit through sort of, I don't know, it seemed like hours, but it's probably 60 seconds worth of them listing their features of their product or service or whatever it was. I did think about giving them a bit of advice, but
yeah.
What I did then, actually, and I've done this before, is turn a call round the other way around and ask them, say, just interesting, just how did you get information on us? How did we end up on your list? And have you got a good CRM system there? Does that
I have done that.
I said, well, we do CRM systems. That's interesting, because ours would tell you, and then they suddenly get on the back foot because they're then in the prospect role, and you flip it around. It's quite interesting.
I had a guy approach me, and because I get people approach me on because obviously you've got the call, like the cold call, but you've also got people approaching each other on LinkedIn, and lead generation is super challenging at the moment. Yeah, but I had a guy approach me with a personalised video. So I think personalisation is key if you can do it. And it was a personalised video on my website, and he'd gone through about 4 or 5 things that it was framed to say, look, personalised video, I've been on your website, there's 4 things that you can do instantaneously to create a change on your website. Yeah. It was such a good video, I forwarded it to my marketing department and said, can we get these action, please? And we're going to be working with him, because it was such a good...
Work. It wasn't just a bit of free
brilliantly. So when somebody does it well, I have to tell them they've done it well. Exactly.
But you can't short circuit that authenticity. They had spent time looking at your website, and it was definitely them, and it was definitely talking about you.
It was. And it was all videoed, and he showed me on the website where to go. It was a very, very clever, very personalised approach that demonstrated instantaneously his expertise and his position in the marketplace.
Yeah. And you can't do 60 or 70 of those a day and just rattle them out, right?
No. So you have to get your targeting right. But when you're going for like bigger businesses and you want less of them, something like that is a much better approach, something that's really personalised, gets their attention, and there's the law of reciprocity. So when somebody's done something like that for you, you have a
there's something in our heads, isn't
obligation.
there? You feel that obligation,
you do.
even though it's not there at all.
Yeah,
but you want to give something back. I guess that's what makes us humans and societal animals and all that.
So how do you? Well, I was going to ask you how you feel about sales.
Well, I'm quite comfortable with it now, but I never used to be. I was also very shy as a teenager, but I got very used to. I got exposed to public speaking very early on, so I was able to at least get rid of that fear, because just being able to talk to people confidently. But I didn't address the knowledge of the product thing or the knowledge of the process. Right. So in the early days of selling, I coped with it by saying, I'm not selling, I'm just talking to somebody. Right. And people are people. There's no reason I need to be any more scared of talking to you as I would talking to one of my mates. I just talk about what we do. And you go through a lot of rejection. I remember when I first set up the company before Wellmeadow, 20-some years ago, a lot of cold calling. And a lot of people, you can't get through the gatekeepers. And even when you do, they're quite rude to you quite often. Or you go to networking meetings and people are superficially kind but effectively blanking you. And you think, this is a hard graft,
Yeah, it is.
And I wouldn't recommend it to anybody if you've got other ways of getting leads, lead magnets and other more successful networking techniques and referral management and all those sorts of things. But sometimes to kickstart a business, you have to just go through that pain.
You do.
And I think it served me well, because it means I can now put myself in the shoes of other businesses trying to win work that way and at least empathise with how hard that can be. Yeah. But I don't know what advice you give to people, but that coping with rejection is a big thing to have to go through when you're not used to it, right? Because you're going to get 99 people saying no for every one that maybe says maybe.
It really is, and you have to harden up a little bit when you're in this arena. So I think if you go into a sales role, kind of what you're setting yourself up for. But when you become a business owner, you typically you're typically set up to be an HR professional or a marketing professional. You don't realise that you've inadvertently taken on a sales role.
Sure.
So suddenly you're faced with this sales role. And rejection, especially when you're dealing with imposter syndrome and fears and doubts and all that stuff, rejection is hard. But I like what you said about, you did a reframe. So you were reframing, this isn't sales, I'm just having a conversation. And, I think if we can reframe the whole sales process into, it's not about me trying to shove a product on you that you don't want or need. It's about us together exploring what your challenges are and whether I've got something I can help you with to resolve that. I think it changes everything. And so the no's that come are authentic. They're authentic because it's a no because they don't have the funds right now, or it's not a good fit. It's not a no because you just did a crap sales process. And that, again, feeds back into a much more positive feedback loop for the person selling.
Yeah, sure. If someone can't drive, there's no point trying to sell them a car, right? And then maybe that's part of what people miss out in their process, just getting that discovery qualification bit.
Well, we take the no's personally when we don't understand the no's. So once we understand the no's, because we've taken them through a proper process, then it's different. Now, cold calling is a different thing entirely. That takes a certain kind of person. And for me, it's about counting the no's. So every single no is a success because the number of no's we get, we're much more likely to get the yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, cold calling is a dark art.
It's a different thing. I get it entirely. But even if you go for more warmed up contacts that you're trying to reach out to, or people even that have contacted you, but then play hard to get, because they're busy and they've got other priorities, and maybe even they were just exploring something and were happy to have a conversation to start with. But then now they start to realise that you've got them down as a prospect and you're getting a bit more serious with it. They weren't really in for that, so then they suddenly back off again. Yeah. But like you say, if you know that's the process and you know how a buyer's thinking goes,
correct,
put yourself in their shoes. That's okay. Fine.
That's it, exactly.
Long time.
That's it. And so we don't take it personally. We move on. Ghosting is something that happens a lot at the moment. So, ever since lockdown, ghosting's been a big thing. And people are taking that personally. But the truth is we don't know what's going on in someone else's life. We don't know why they're not responding. Are they busy? Have they got something going on? So the whole sales thing is about not taking it personally and sitting in your own power. It's hard, but possible.
I think the other thing that we've had to learn as well the hard way, and you can only do this looking in the rearview mirror, I think, talking about your journey, where you've come from. It's very hard if you haven't experienced this yet, but being prepared to disqualify a prospect or a lead or whatever very early on, and not assume that you have to keep working the few leads that you've got to the eventual death of the lead. Give up on people quickly. There's an awful lot of people out there.
That's right.
And someone told me very early on in my business career of the theory of infinite opportunity. He says effectively speaking, there's an infinite number of people out there that you could sell to. So don't chase the one down that is playing hard to get. There's another infinite minus one that you can go and have a go at.
So we use an analogy of a reservoir. So because, lots of people at the moment are seeing the economy shrink, so you immediately think the opportunity is shrinking. More and more business owners are coming in, the opportunity is shrinking. But the truth is there is a reservoir of opportunity. And even if we lost 20% of that, which would be a global recession, we only want a teaspoon out of that reservoir. Yeah. So that opportunity is still there for us. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And learning to, when we realise we can say no, it's much easier than to hear a no from a customer.
Yeah, and I often give that advice when I'm dealing with companies that say, but we're in a recession, and the GDP has gone down by 2% or whatever it might have been. But like you say, the amount that's left is still pretty much the same as it was before. Yeah. Whether that market is 98% of the size that it was or 101, from your point of view, it doesn't really matter because you've got 0.00001 market share. So just crack on with it.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go back a bit to something you said earlier on, because you talked about sort of two aspects, and this is where my assumption came in, of whether imposter syndrome is about the skill and knowledge and techniques of being a salesperson, we've talked a lot about that, or whether it's about the knowledge of the product or service you do. Now, sometimes you've certainly got to know what you're selling. I get it.
Yeah.
But there are certain situations in sales teams where the first person isn't necessarily the technical expert. They're more employed for their skills in relationship building and understanding need and all that sort of thing. And they need to hand over. So how do you coach people in smaller businesses where you don't have this sort of big team to hand over to say that you don't have to know absolutely every nuts and bolts answer of your product or service to still be an effective salesperson?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because I kind of think you do. So I think let's take a one-man band. If you are the product and service, if you are all service, if you are the, what you're selling, I actually think you do need to understand the ins and outs of what it is that you're selling to a degree. So certainly what you're selling you need to know. There's like other deeper parts of it that you might not need to know. But I think it's important that you do know what it is that you're selling to a point where you can give the customer confidence that you understand it. If it's something technical, you will always rely on somebody else, whether it's outsourced or something else, you will always rely on something else. But I think that absence of knowledge in the sales environment is what's causing a lot of the imposter syndrome.
And yet, if I play a scenario of recent sales calls I've had or opportunities that you bump into, I find it quite rare that anybody will challenge me on anything too detailed about what we do, how we do it, what it is that we're selling. And it's all really about just understanding whether they trust you or not, building that relationship, building the trust.
That's the trust piece. So when you have when you can build rapport with somebody and you can have that trust, you're absolutely right. People won't question. I'm mulling that over. I get what you're saying from the trust perspective. I think trust is key. If you can establish that in the conversation, then people don't question.
There's lots of different things we do, whether we're acting as non-exec board chairman or we're helping them with their CRMs or whatever. But I don't find that there's a drilling down to understand whether our exact way of dealing with that is going to fit their need.
No, because they trust you.
And they're trusting me.
Yeah.
And it's more about, I've done this lots of times before.
That's it.
I can point you to all sorts of people that will talk to you. Of course, no one ever takes you up on that, but it's genuine.
Don't. I've never been asked for my qualifications. I'm a qualified coach. There's plenty of people out there that aren't. I'm a qualified NLP practitioner. No one has ever, in the history of ever, asked me to prove that. Because when you have that degree of confidence, when you can establish that trust, you don't need to go into that level of detail. But in order to be that confidence, we're talking about the people with imposter syndrome, I think having that understanding to fall back on. I think when you know you've got gaps and you're terrified of the one question that they might ask that exposes those gaps, I think that's where the problems start.
Do you do role play with these people?
I don't do role play. We do a lot of training, but we don't do role play specifically. I know they go off in, because we run a club, so they go off in groups sometimes and role play with each other. But I'm a massive fan of practicing. So practice in front of the mirror. I mean, who cares? Nobody's watching. So I'm a big fan of practicing and just, going out and being willing to make mistakes. Just have the conversation and keep tweaking until you have something that works. Networking is great for that because you can go out, practice, and then just move on if it was an absolute disaster.
Or practice in real life. Just, there are, as we just said, infinite number of leads out there, so burn up a few just by learning. Try the hard ones. Something that's just cropped up as well, and I wonder if this does work, I've not tried it, is just use ChatGPT. Tell it to say, adopt the persona of an awkward buyer, and let's have a conversation.
I have never tried that, but I'm absolutely going to do it now you've suggested it. Yeah.
Interesting thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's something to do. So I know we're running short of time, we could spend hours on this, and you spend 28 days on your courses on it. So I guess we can't cram all of that into half an hour. But can you leave us with just a sort of a gem of a thought? If someone was interested in this sort of area, what one takeaway could they take away and try and do something different?
Do you mean imposter syndrome or sales? Because I've got a gem in both.
Give us two then, we'll have a bonus.
Okay, fine. So how much time have we got? Because I want to... Right, fine. So for sales... it's about, there's a click that has to happen between really understanding your avatar, like who you're targeting, your niche, what your product is and what your pricing strategy is. And you kind of have to keep going round in circles until you get what we call the click and it makes sense. So if we get the wrong product with the wrong pricing strategy or it's targeted at the wrong person, it doesn't work. But if you can get that click working, then you've got the beginnings of really taking something to market. We then need to look at positioning, so how you're going to differentiate yourself and your position in the marketplace, messaging in alignment with that market, and then you look at consultative selling and lead generation. Most people are trying to solve the lead generation problem without these components in place, And that is what's causing, I think, a lot of the imposter syndrome and challenges at the sales arena. So that's my tip for the sales bit. Get the click
first.
Yeah, and then
that's
think
where
about
your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and your pricing and your product, that all just makes sense. It works.
Will make sense from that point, and that's the bit that I think is missing. From an imposter syndrome perspective, there's an exercise. Am I allowed to mention a book?
I think you can.
Thank you. So there's a book called 28-Day Self-Esteem Reboot, and there's an exercise that I use on a regular basis that's come from that book, and it's called the I Like Myself exercise. And when I'm dealing with somebody who has imposter syndrome, I set this as homework for them in between sessions. And it's in 4 parts. So the first part is you get to the end of your day and you look for the highlight in your day. So that could be, it doesn't need to be like the greatest thing that ever happened, but some kind of highlight that happened during the day. The second thing is and you have to write this down. The second thing is you write down, why was that the highlight? What was it about that thing that made it the highlight of the day? The third thing you write down, which is key, was what was your part in that? So what was your part in making that the highlight? And then the fourth thing you write is, I like myself because something related to that. So can I just go through an example?
Yeah, go on, yeah, do that.
Okay, so let's say that the highlight was, because for some people with imposter syndrome, they're pretty low sometimes. So let's say the highlight was, I saw a robin in the garden, right? That's the best I can come up with today. So I saw a robin in the garden, that was my highlight. Why was that a highlight? Because it was a moment of beauty. I was really connecting with nature. It was just lovely. What was my part in it? Some people struggle with their part in they saw a robin in the garden. Well, my part was being somebody that appreciates the beauty of nature. So that allowed me to have that magical moment. And then I like myself because I appreciate the beauty in nature. The I like myself bit has to be in the present tense, and it has to be about you, not someone else. So it can't be I like myself because my kids are great. It has to be I like myself, something in the present tense, like I like myself because I appreciate the beauty in nature. Do that for a month, 2 months, 3 months, consistently, every single night without missing it, and it starts to create a shift in how we perceive ourselves, and it massively helps with confidence.
And this has to be written down. It's a journaling.
Written down, it's journaling. Yeah, you can go back over it. It's very powerful, but it's just a small nudge towards you just owning how awesome you are as a human being, and it consistently creates a shift in our levels of confidence and self-esteem.
Well, there's a bit of a good tip to end on. Thank you very much. That's 2 tips there. One for each. So thank you very much again, Tracy, for coming in. It's been a great conversation.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Lots in there. We'll put a link to your website in the show notes. What is it, your website?
It's biggerbrighterbolder.co.uk.
Great. We'll put that in the show notes and people can go and have an explore on that. You do lots of courses and coaching. And all sorts of help for typically smaller businesses, £1 million businesses.
Yeah, sub-1 million, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great niche to be in. So fantastic. And thank you again for coming all the way up to Shrewsbury.
Now I know how to pronounce it.
We'll get you to pronounce it correctly. Yeah. So thank you again for listening to another episode of the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow. Every week we try and come up with something interesting, useful, humorous, or just a bit wacky for owners and managers of small and medium-sized enterprises. And we hope that's been another good and useful one for you. If you thought that was good, then please share it with your friends. Either like it or follow it on all the podcast platforms, or just drop an email with a link to one of your mates, or tell them when you're next in the pub. Thanks a lot and good luck with your business.